When the great American Western artist Charles M. Russell painted the idyllic scene of a herd of bison crossing the vast Missouri River at sunset, he named the painting When the Land Belonged to God. This profound painting, and many of Russell's other masterpieces, gave tributes to a vanishing way of life for native populations and a rapidly changing landscape that had been virtually untouched for thousands of years. But since the time of the Lewis and Clark expedition, pioneers had been journeying westward in search of a new start on life, in lands filled with mountains and forests, farmland, lakes and rivers, and even the promise of new riches. The first wave of those new riches came from the lucrative fur trade, where enterprises like John Jacob Astor's American Fur Company made the equivalent of billions in today's dollars. And the second wave of those newfound riches came with the advent of the American prospector and his search for gold and silver. Indeed, on the rare occasion of a gold discovery, news of the find would spread like wildfire, and a surge of rare metal seekers would flood in from afar to stake their claim. With their trusty gold pans, the inquisitive prospectors would condense and sift a shovelful of stream gravel down into a fine concentration of whatever metals may or may not be present. The golden leaves of autumn may have been a beautiful backdrop for the prospector's cabin, but it was the metallic gold in his gold pan that dazzled his eyes and hopes for riches and independent wealth. The gold was found in the streams, and so that is where they built their cabins, their mining camps, and eventually their bustling boom towns. From the discoveries of gold at Sutter's Mill in California to the rich discoveries in Nevada City and Virginia City in Montana, hopeful seekers came by the hundred and by the thousand, dazzled by the wealth that seemed to be in their grasp. All they had to do was get a grub stake and take a chance and work and work and work their mining claim and hope for the best. And for these dedicated pioneer gold seekers, the natural resources of their surroundings provided many of the basics of life: plentiful game for food, forests for logs, lumber, and firewood, and the very streams that drew them to seek their fortunes, at least initially, provided them with an occasional trout for dinner. But shiny flecks of gold were the real catch that they wanted. These independent gold miners soon figured out that they could increase their production of the yellow stuff if they teamed up, got organized, and worked together. They set up sluice boxes, which ran the gold-rich gravel through a series of water ridges that were designed to capture the heavy gold that would sink to the bottom of their wooden-sided streams. In the beginning, these small-scale techniques were adequate for the average prospector, but soon, placer mining techniques were developed in which a powerful stream of water was aimed directly at a gold-rich embankment, and the gold was washed out in mass. Big money from back east flowed in to finance these massive placer mining operations, some of which required miles of water flumes to supply enough hydraulic head and water pressure to make this technique functional. Then, massive mechanical gold dredges were invented to excavate the stream beds, and they did it quickly and efficiently. Suddenly, gold-bearing stream deposits could be dredged up by the ton and literally processed and separated right there in the bowels of this dinosaur-sized mechanical monster. Indeed, gold extraction had become an industry, and with that wealth came real cities and towns, with hotels, theaters, schools, churches and saloons, barbershops, restaurants, gambling establishments, general stores, and of course, houses of ill repute, which supplied the miners with pleasures, but also an occasional good reason to visit a local doctor. Gold had brought growth, prosperity, and culture to the wilderness. And so, with a population of over 10,000 by 1868, Virginia City, the gold camp, had become the hub of the Montana Territory. 14 different gold boomtowns had sprung up in Alder Gulch in Montana, but today only Virginia City and Nevada City exist. There, modern-day visitors can get a taste of what the Old West was really like. In those days of burgeoning settlements, it was the horse-drawn carriages and wagons that facilitated the development of these boomtowns. Stagecoaches were a fast mode of transportation for the day, and they were designed to withstand the challenging terrain of the rough and tumble roads, which were many times not much more than a semi-cleared trail. And their strong, lean, spoked wheels minimized the overall weight of the carriage while providing the rotational strength to support the coach, the drivers, the passengers, and the luggage. Today, visitors to Nevada City can marvel at the carriage works that houses amazing preserved examples of the transportation vehicles of yesteryear. Those horse-drawn carriages would be worthless without properly shod horses. The horseshoe protected the hoof, and for that reason, farriers and blacksmiths were like a nugget of gold themselves. And without the town blacksmith carefully placed in custom-fit horseshoes, everything involving a horse would have ground to a quick halt. Even on the frontier, the people had become deeply interconnected and reliant on one another, and the village blacksmith is but one of the many examples of that fact. Within a couple of decades, these mining towns that survived were suddenly interconnected with the railroad system. There was no greater influence on the commercial development of the West than the railroads. Freight and passengers gathered at the town depot, much like people of today gather at a modern-day airport before their journey. The coal-fired steam engines pulled their long lines of boxcars, cattle cars, and passenger cars through all types of weather on a schedule that could be relied upon. Few examples of authentic rail cars from the old days exist, but one such tattered remnant of the past rests peacefully on the old retired tracks at Nevada City. And though this heavy machinery of progress was important, it was the people themselves that made the difference. Like Paris Fouts, the mayor of Virginia City back in 1865. Mayor Fouts led a controversial group of vigilantes who took law matters into their own hands and hung the criminal road agents stealing their gold shipments. And there was James Williams, who acted as captain of these vigilantes, and he and his crew rounded up 24 individuals for prosecution and hanging. Many of them rousted up at night and dragged out of their beds. There was John Beadler, who acted as the deputy sheriff and the deputy marshal and acted in unison with the vigilantes. And there was William Fisk Sanders, the nephew of the governor and the vigilante prosecutor, the man who later became Montana's first United States Senator. The citizenry of Virginia City and Nevada City and the rest of Alder Gulch grew tired of the lawlessness, the gold robberies, the murders, and the violence over gambling, so they were supportive of the vigilantes' actions to bring law and order and civility and safety to the booming mining district. Civilization had arrived, and the good townspeople were ready for change. Families were moving in, churches were being established, and amazingly, even letters could be mailed to anywhere in the United States. As one old prospector commented in the city newspaper, "When I see a picket fence around a cabin, I know things are a-changing. I'm not sure for the better, though." And thanks to organizations like the Montana Masonic Lodges, the first one which had been established in the nearby gold town of Bannock, the establishment of schools to meet new educational standards was a major priority. Many of the crucial factors in the taming of the bustling mining towns were the refinements and standards that came with the female settlers. More often than not, the ladies of the settlements organized into auxiliaries and other organizations aimed at improving the quality of life for the townspeople. For the wealthier ladies, fine furniture was often shipped from back east to add a touch of upscale class and elegance to their Victorian-style homes. These determined women dedicated themselves to bringing upscale amenities and refinements to life on the frontier. Taking a leisurely bath in Nevada City need not be any different than in an upscale mansion in New York City. These ladies of Alder Gulch gathered for tea and discussed drama, religion, art, fashion, economics, educational challenges for their kids, sourcing for home supplies, and any other issue that would maintain or improve the lives of their families or the residents of their growing city. Many women pioneers started businesses delivering services to the community. Some ran boarding houses, some ran hotels, others had laundry businesses, and others ran general stores. Others even taught music and gave piano lessons. Music is a cornerstone of society, and Virginia City and Nevada City were no different. And even today, the visitors to Nevada City can visit the music hall and marvel at the collection of mechanical music-making machines, some that came from as far away as Paris, France. Our modern society of today doesn't realize that mechanical musical contraptions were popular in the latter half of the 1800s and the early 1900s. Player pianos, mechanical tooting calliopes, machine tapping drum sets, crank depressing organ pipes, and bellowing, blowing concoctions of horns were combined in various configurations to create a spectacular musical menagerie, all encased in a masterfully carved and painted encasement. And speaking of carved painted wood, the town's barber was proud to place his boldly painted spiral barber pole outside of his business to alert the townfolk that there was no reason to wander around town with a scruffy beard and a messy, untrimmed head of hair. Despite the persistent historical myth that the pioneers of these mining boom towns were dirty, scraggly, stinky characters, most strive for at least a weekly bath, haircut, and shave. And besides that, the barbershop was always a great place to catch up on all of the town's latest gossip. Speaking of gathering places, no one in these pioneer towns could have ever survived long were it not for the general store. From canned goods to salt and flour to yard goods to candy, cookware, candles, kerosene, bacon, eggs, and underwear, the general store merchants stocked every conceivable item that the residents might likely purchase. There was one other quaint little jewel in these boom towns, and that was the assayer's office. As the chemist of the day, the assayer determined the gold and silver content of the rock, thereby determining if the ore on a claim was worth digging or worth just leaving alone. Many times, mining venture investors came up short when the assayer's office determined that the samples methodically collected and then chemically analyzed simply didn't result in gold values that warranted even calling it a gold mine or a placer claim. Thousands of pages of numerous books have been filled with the life stories of the rugged pioneers who settled Nevada City, Virginia City, and the other mining camps of Alder Gulch. These classically preserved towns are treasures that give value, not in the precious metals currently scoured from their soil, but rather in the rich history that is granted to all willing to receive it. And these amazingly preserved buildings would not be here were it not for the preservation efforts of Charles and Sue Bovey, who visited Alder Gulch in the mid-1940s and simply fell in love with the area's history. As a result, they spent the rest of their lives and most of their money preserving and restoring dilapidated cabins and buildings. In fact, they purchased and moved significantly historic structures to the area as well. They pioneered historic preservation at a time when most old buildings were simply being torn down and replaced with modern structures. Nearly 160 years of American frontier history reside in these once gold-filled hills and hollows. Today, Virginia City and Nevada City rest in kind of a peaceful slumber, but they are happy to open their buildings and streets and marvelous memories to the inquisitive visitors that happen to wander in their direction. Hope you enjoyed this mini documentary. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like, and also please hit the subscribe button. Thank you for watching.